All right.
Yeah,
I'm ready. I'm ready.
I'm ready to go in on it.
Okay. So
I'm
we
just
are
saying,
live
right?
now.
Three ice
Like,
damage. Why is the Frost Maiden
no, we're not talking about that.
just
I'm gonna bitch about Woody Allen first.
Okay.
three ice damage? Is
Three?
ridiculous.
You said
So look,
three. For the
yeah,
for the
three
for the
three D.
goddess of
No,
winter.
but when she crits, right? When she
Oh,
crits,
it's six.
She should do three ice damage because you looked at her.
Right. Right. If you say the word Frost Maiden, you should take three ice damage.
Right.
Right. Like you're in a bar and you're like, so Frost Maiden. Oh.
Right.
Right. Like that's how it should go. Oh man, I got to do it again on my Discord, and they're like, and very reasonable people like you, Sam, and others are saying like, well, it's not just that one thing, right? Like it's
yeah.
actually part of a thing, and she does a lot of. I'm like, it's three. Like
No, I know.
Suffolk Caltro does seven.
Yeah.
The
No, I
guy
mean,
she works for. It's like,
yeah.
So
She has flaws,
so
definitely.
so
I'm not,
Sam,
yeah.
tell me about Woody Allen.
yeah. Let's talk about Woody Allen.
So Woody Allen. No, seriously though, like, so this is actually a valid conversation for us to have about RPGs.
Okay.
Because, not because Woody Allen has anything to do with RPGs.
I thought this was going to be random,
here's
but
the
go
thing,
ahead.
right? Yeah. So Woody Allen, right? So he married Soon Yi, his stepdaughter, who he had raised since she was 6. She was adopted, yes, not his blood stepdaughter, but not his blood daughter, but still gross, ew, right? So
Right.
yeah, no, if I'm raising somebody from the time they're 6, at any point in time, if visions of marriage with me in the ceremony, like, no, that's just not
Right.
right.
Think about it.
Yeah, it's just gross.
Creepy.
But it happened, right?
But he did a whole movie about it.
Right. But so he's a whole, and there's also allegations of abuse of his other children. So there's all sorts of bad shit that was going on, right?
Right.
Okay. So he's not a good person, right? But I know people, not myself, but I know people who think that he is a brilliant filmmaker, that his films are exquisite, that they capture a certain time and place so exquisitely that he is a filmmaking genius.
And Annie
I'm
Hall.
like I said,
Annie Hall won a bunch of Academy Awards.
look, I am not a proponent of, like, whatever. They're his movies are mediocre to me, but whatever. But I have not watched a Woody movie, Allen, since the whole thing came out, right? So here's the thing. Here's the reason why this relates to RPGs, because it is entirely in the purview of the consumer, of the fan, right? Whether they choose to still consume media produced by someone or some entity that has done bad shit, right?
Yep.
So it is fully in a fan's purview whether they want to decide to watch another Woody Allen movie, or whether
fan.
to read each fan,
Yeah, we
whether
all get
to
to decide.
read another J.K. Rowling book,
Right.
okay, or whether to purchase a product that TSR created in the 80s,
Right.
that has depictions of drow elves and orcs that could possibly be construed as a commentary on race that connects them to black people, or that has a comment on alignment that makes it seem like dark colored creatures are more evil and light colored creatures are not, like all of those things, right? And that has a creator, Gary Gygax, who was a biological essentialist, and so therefore believes that men are men and women are women, and that women have certain ideas and things that they enjoy, and RPGs are not one of those things, and that's not going to change. So there's no reason to market RPGs to women, because women don't enjoy
correctly.
RPGs, right?
Yeah, right.
I'm not going to post a link, but you could go to the Dragon's Foot website, and before he died, he's been dead for years now, okay, people? He's been dead for years. He has nothing to do with this latest TSR3 bullshit, right? But he was a biological essentialist. He was a human being. He had flaws. He definitely had beliefs that I don't agree with, but I'm not going to stop playing D&D just because of that.
Now,
So
here's where I have a question though, and because to me, here's the difference. When I consume Woody Allen movies, or when I buy J.K. Rowling books, I am putting money in their pockets. There is nothing D&D that I can buy that puts money in the pocket of Gary Gygax. He is gone.
Or Ernie Gygax, right? Who we might be worried about now.
Sure.
Right. So yeah, but
it's a free market question. Right.
But if they were alive, right, and if somehow the Gygax name, if Gail Gygax and Ernie Gygax, not Luke, because he's totally against all this bullshit they've been doing,
right.
but if Ernie actually started a company that somehow got the rights to AD&D and started publishing or republishing cleaned up versions of the AD&D books, and therefore you could purchase them, I know a lot of people who would buy those AD&D books. Okay. Now, the fact of the matter is Wizards of the Coast owns all the trademarks to D&D. So all this new TSR bullshit is complete flatulence. Okay. It has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with reality. They are being bullshit. That's what they're doing, right? They're trying to muddy the waters and pretend like they own a trademark. They do not. When Wizards of the Coast purchased TSR, they purchased it whole cloth. All the trademarks, all of the copyright, everything that they could purchase, they purchased. So they own it. And they have been selling it for several years on the GM's Guild. Okay, they've been selling older editions, TSR marked editions, and all that stuff. WotC owns it. Okay, they've owned D&D longer than Gary Gygax had anything to do with D&D. All right, but that's beside the point. To answer your question, this is the reason why I don't watch Woody Allen movies now. Right? Not that I was a big fan in the first place. I probably wouldn't, but I also will never buy a J.K. Rowling book. Right? Mm-hmm. Not again. Right? I own the Harry Potter books. Right? Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't purchase if I didn't own them now. I would not purchase them now.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. And I look at the movies. So I've never been much of a fan of the books. Easy for me to say now. But I am a fan of the movies. And the way I look at it is like there were hundreds and hundreds of people that made those movies, and they're not assholes.
Right.
And it's like so.
Oh, Daniel Radcliffe basically said, "Look, if you read the books before you knew that she was going to say these things,
right.
Those books are, there is a school of thought that says when the artist produces an item, it's theirs until they release it for consumption by the audience. As soon as it's released for consumption by the audience, it becomes the property of the audience. And whatever meaning you put into it is the meaning that it now has.
Sure.
So it doesn't matter what J.K. Rowling does or says, because you can, you can put whatever meaning you want on it. But the free market question is, do you want to put money in her pocket?
Because
no.
Right. Because ultimately, I agree. It's mine to consume and make what meaning matters to me. But that doesn't affect the percentage that she gets. And hundreds of people worked on it. But I bet she gets a higher percentage than anybody else.
Sure. Right. No, you're right. You're right. It's just, I mean, it's one thing about the money. I don't think whatever $8 she gets from all the times I buy the movies is pretty small in her world.
And I'm streaming it on HBO, so she's getting, I imagine, like 3 cents a play.
Yeah. But it's also about just enjoying the creation of all of those people.
Right? But J.K. Rowling's not done making stuff. The Fantastic Beasts movies are still being produced and coming out.
Yeah,
How do we feel about that?
Well, and I feel, that the Fantastic, it's easy for me to throw those out because I don't really like them. So,
but see, that's
it's easy.
Like,
easy to have an opinion when your opinion is I don't like it anyway.
But if somebody consumed one of those movies before they realized that J.K. Rowling was such a shit stain, right?
Right.
Like if they consumed those, and so they decide that they like that media, and now they want to see the next one. I don't begrudge those people that. Would I choose it? No, for myself, I don't choose it. But that's why I say that that it's up to each fan, it's up to each consumer to make that choice. That's part of the benefit of the free market, right? That's all it is, right? Is that it's part of the, so, we don't live in a place where suddenly the government can say, okay, well, J.K. Rowling's a shit, so we're going to not ever allow anybody to stream her movies ever again. Like that's not going to happen. Right. And so it's individual's choice whether to consume that media. And if it puts money in her pocket, then that's the choice they're making. Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing where, there was one thing, if somebody goes out and they already had bought her books from previously and they go burn her books, well, that's not doing anything, right? She already made the money off of those. Like, that's not going to help anything. So you might as well donate those to a library, because then somebody will go read those books, but they didn't give her money to do it, right? That's perfect. Like, donate that shit to a library, okay? But yeah, I mean, that's the same with Woody Allen. It's up to each consumer to decide, right? Yeah. And it's a lot of times people consume things without knowing anything about the creator, and that's okay. You don't have to learn everything about a creator. And some people are able to completely separate the art from the artist, and they don't think it makes any difference whether they enjoy the thing that was produced and they don't like the other person. It's not going to stop them from enjoying the other thing. Like, that's totally, it's an individual's choice. I'm not making any judgments about that. I'm just saying Woody Allen, ooh, gross. J.K. Rowling, total shit stain.
Okay.
Yeah, and to me, we talked a little bit about we'll talk about D&D. I think this is relevant. We've mentioned this is relevant to D&D. There's also the aspect of what are the, if you were to eliminate J.K. Rowling's horseshit and just look at the movies, what are the problematic issues of the movies? Right. And we talked about the idea that, like, hey, Harry Potter's godfather is a slave owner, and the Jewish stereotype of the goblins and Gringotts. And so there's still things to look at. And then it's like, well, if you see those things, can you still enjoy the rest of it with the acceptance of, but I've spent 10 years tearing apart Harry Potter movies for fun.
The fact that people are still read classic fantasy novels and what have you from the 70s, 80s, and honestly into the 90s, and can do so and separate the fact that there is some problematic shit. I would argue the depiction of pseudo-Native Americans in the original Dragonlance is problematic. Right. But I can still enjoy reading the Dragonlance novels and recognize the problematic bits to it.
Yeah, there are times, there's times where it's overboard. There was a Conan novella that I read recently because it was recommended as like a really great example of like a ruined city and the factions. And I was into it pretty heavily, and I'm like, wow, this is so misogynistic and so racist. I'm like, I'm not seeing the rest of it. Right. Like, it's not,
sometimes I can't go.
That way overburdened. So,
yeah. Well, here's one, Orson Scott Card wrote Ender's Game. Yeah. Great, book. And I never saw the movie, but great book for a lot of people and whatever. Right. Great themes, a great sci-fi story, great, all this stuff. He's a raging fucking homophobe piece of shit, right?
He was
raging big, right?
He called for revolt against the U.S. government because of gay marriage.
Right. So, here's a person who I will, there is some value to the work. Is there value to the work? I don't know, right? I'm not the person to make that designation or that determination, But Ender's Game is a book that is often on reading lists for young people, and so it's a question or a topic to be had that if you use that media as a source or as an inspiration for your RPG, like, you don't have to use that artists or that designers or that whoever produced that item. You don't have to use their attitudes as your inspiration. You use that art they produced. That's why I say when they release that art into the wild, it becomes the property of the audience. And whatever meanings you want to put on it, and whatever life lesson you get from it, or whatever you however you identify with it, is for you and you alone. Right.
Let's talk about some D&D.
Let's do it. So we are 16 minutes into our stream and have not yet started the episode, but this was a fun rant. I was curious, are we going to lose audience or gain them with these rants? But ultimately...
Is that what we've been aiming for?
Losing all the audience?
I have never done the podcast in order to garner the largest audience possible. If that's why I was doing it, there are things that I have learned that I could do to accomplish that. But
sure.
Here we are. That said, Mike,
I think my jumpy camera is far more likely to lose people.
So I don't know. So
I think it stopped moving, right?
It did.
The box size is staying the same.
Right. So the thing that you sent, the thing that you sent information about how to fix it, that's the box size thing. That's what I had already done.
Yeah, and I realized you already had that. Yeah. You see, whoa, there it goes. Right.
Yeah.
Just did it.
So I don't know what's going on and why it's...
It has to do. It's the NDI mode of Skype, right? The NDI
Sure.
mode is changing the resolution to fit the stream,
Oh.
and I've got my kick-ass 4K camera. It's actually only sending 1080p, but I think it sends a high bit rate. It's high frame rate, and so it's probably eating up bandwidth, and Skype is dropping the resolution. So yeah, sorry, friends on Twitch.
Yeah, well, Skype actually doesn't take that great of a recording anyway. So
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Yeah, the only other way to fix it would be to grab a window snapshot instead of using NDI for my headshot. But then
the audio files that we get off of Skype have a lot more background garbage noise than.
I'm getting a new mic tomorrow.
Awesome.
I ordered a Procaster, a Rode Procaster.
Y'all want to complain about it? I'll spend some time again looking at other options, and it's largely just been an issue of it works and it's easy and it's already set up.
Sure.
So
sure. Yeah.
No, it's fine. I mean, it's not that bad. If it was hard enough that I wasn't able to keep editing, then I would have told you a long time ago. It's not even a big deal.
Well,
but I don't want it to mess up the visual thing and give Mike max headroom.
I mean, it's not that bad. It's a little tweak every now and then. It's not bothering me, but
it bothers me because of how much stuff I've got involved in this, and it still looks like crap.
Well, that sounds like a mic problem.
I've got 3-point lighting. I've got a boom arm I just added so I can do my hair light and not have it reflecting, and I've sound protection behind me, but I guess that's for the audio recording.
So should we go ahead and get this episode started?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
I got things to talk about.
Find my. Oh, good. There's an update to my recording software that I didn't notice until now. I would have had plenty of time to update it. All right. I am recording. Welcome to Behind the DM Screen. We are 3 DMs talking about our games, helping each other out. It is January of 2022. This is our first recording. I am Jeff Greiner. I am here with Mike Shea. Say hello, Mike.
Hello.
And Sam Dillon. Say hello, Sam.
Hello.
And that's us, and that's the intro, and that's what you're going to get here in 2022. That's the show.
We're done.
That's it. Yeah, we're finished.
All right. Thanks for listening. We'll
Thanks
talk
for
to you
listening,
later.
everybody.
So I'm pulling up my timer to because we're always very, very good about sticking to our designated time because it's very important. I get to go first. Awesome. So since we last recorded, I don't know, almost a month and a half ago now, I played twice based off of my notes from the last time we recorded. That's how I always remember where we left off, because all of my notes are bullet points on a sheet of paper, so I can see what my bullet points were last time. Last time we chatted, I had finished my big campaign that included Dragon Heist and Curse of Strahd, and then a bunch of stuff afterwards. And then I talked about doing character generation for Torg Eternity, and then I lied to Mike. I know, right? Mike is shocked. No, I didn't actually lie to Mike. I thought more about something that I said and realized I was probably wrong. You were talking about I don't even remember what the advice was, but we were talking about character creation, and you gave some advice that applies to particularly crunchy games, and I'm like, well, Torg's not really that crunchy of a game. And I realized, as I thought about it afterwards, I'm like, no, Torg is a very crunchy game. It just incorporates interesting, storytelling elements, too, that makes me think of it incorporating, story game sort of ideas. And so that makes me think, oh, well, story games aren't super crunchy. And so I had, in my head, I hadn't associated it with a super crunchy game. But then I realized there are just pages and pages and pages of how to do every little action, and they all have rules, and it's very, very crunchy. So Torg is a very crunchy game. It's also very cinematic and story driven, though, at the same time, because all of those things can be true. We played our first Torg Eternity game with the group, because we're basically, the plan is we're gonna do a bunch of little short runs and try out some different things. And so my thought was, I really love Torg. I want to do a bunch of stuff with Torg, but I thought we'd do like an adventure. Usually the published adventures have like 5 acts or 7 acts, which you can probably play in 3 or 4 sessions, and then we would take a break and play a few sessions of, I don't know, Star Wars or whatever, right? But we did, the first one was just sort of a one shot of, hey, you need to sneak into France and rescue this woman who is raising up a resistance to the invaders, and is calling herself the reincarnation of Joan of Arc. We don't actually care if she's actually the reincarnation of Joan of Arc, because she's raising a resistance to the bad guys, and that's all that really matters. So we don't care if she's deluded or not. Let's just buy into this. It did raise an interesting question, and that's literally like, and then I ran one session for my kids. That's pretty much all the gaming I've done in the last month and a half. Well, no, that's all the running I've done in the last month and a half. We played a little bit of Gloomhaven with the kids, and one of my players ran our holiday session. We did Honey Heist. I don't know if you're familiar with Honey Heist.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yep.
So we played some Honey Heist.
Honey Heist is a really crunchy RPG.
Yeah. No. Yeah. There's 2 stats. Yeah. the stat is it's a spectrum. The stat is a spectrum, and it runs between bear and criminal. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, similar to Lasers and Feelings, right? Is it done by the same guy? Is it John Harper?
Maybe. I don't know. Because it was one of my players who ran it, and she had been working on this stuff. Like, she had worked up props, and there were, she brought in Nerf guns, and we had to shoot targets of G.I. Joe men, because it was the Christmas in the mall one, and all the toys had come to life, and so we had to shoot all the G.I. Joe men that were trying to kill us, No,
Grant Howitt made
Honey Heist.
Honey Heist.
So yeah, we ran one of those. But I did have one. I had one question and one observation, and then in case I ran out of time, had extra time, I did ask the Twitter sphere for topics to discuss, and I got one thing there. So we'll see where we're at for time. My one thing to sort of talk a little bit about has to do with Torg. So my players are largely D&D players for the most part, and in D&D there is a very sort of loot focused mentality, right? You kill a bad guy, you take the loot, you get the gold, you get the items or whatever, and then you use them, right? Torg is not set up that way, and I think in a way that because it's trying to capture this sort of cinematic feel, right? James Bond doesn't like loot the bodies and track every dollar that he gets out of the wallet of the bad guys that he shoots, right? So Torg actually just has a mechanic of, hey, you want to requisition gear from the organization you work for before a mission? Here's how to do it, right? You want to go to the local coffee shop and buy something? There's a roll to make to see if you just have the money to do that. You don't need to track your currency or whatever. But I have a group of players that are very loot-minded. And so, hey, we killed this cyborg person. Can I strip the cybernetics out of their body and see if I can get them installed in myself? Is sort of a thing that happened. And I'm like, well, I don't know how we're going to handle that, but sure, let's go ahead and do that. But you're clearly still working from a very loot the bodies, get the goods sort of mentality. And I'm curious what you all think about that, and how to handle that when you've got a group of people who have these assumptions about the game. Even when you tell them that those assumptions are wrong about the game, they still act on those assumptions. And then I'll tell you how I handled it, but I'm curious what you guys think about doing something like that.
Well, I have this problem quite often in a slightly different way. Mm-hmm. So when I play a lot of Castles and Crusades or sort of old school D&D style games, mm-hmm. where the goal is not always to fight the monster and defeat it. And, when these games were made, or the way that they're made is not really meant to be a monster kill fest. It's not meant to go out, and every challenge you meet is not necessarily going to be defeatable or winnable. And that's a very third, fourth, and fifth edition D&D has a very sort of expected, if I'm meeting this challenge, I can defeat it in some way. In many respects, that's how those games are set up, and that's the sort of, even if it's not true of every game, I'm not putting things on people's own individual tables, but the sort of idea and gestalt about the way that game is played is it's relatively balanced, and it's meant to be the case that when you meet a creature, if you do fight it, you're basically going to be able to defeat it. Like in some way. And that's not really how, for example, Castles and Crusades is set up at all. You can't expect that you're going to be able to defeat things because you're a lot squishier than modern D&D games, and death comes quickly, and saving throws are harder to make, and this, that, and the other. And so those games have a sort of very different kind of focus than what the more modern D&D games have. And so the way that I have to deal with that is I have to, first of all, tell the players, right? But telling them is not enough, right? You have to also then show them in game that the things that they're doing are not giving them the results that they are expecting or that they're wanting, and never will, right? And that's the only, so, I don't know exactly what your situation is or what happened, but that's basically the only way it's ever worked for me, is tell them straight out of game, this game doesn't play that way. And then when they still exhibit those behaviors in game, it has to not give them the desired outcome. That's all.
Matt Colville did an interesting video about RPGs and rewards and the kinds of reward, how to understand the kinds of rewards that a game is driving for, and that rewards are behavior, right? That rewards drive behavior. And he brought up the example of like old school D&D, the reward was pick up treasure. It really didn't matter about monsters because you were going to get more experience points from picking up treasure than you were to kill monsters. And so it was a loot-based game. And he said now it isn't a loot-based game anymore. Treasure and magic items aren't really the drive. The drive is something else. And his kind of way of reaching this was, why not just tell them? Right? Like just say, here is here is the reward that you're going to get, and here is the thing that you're going to do to get it. So the example is like, if you're going to run, and this is something where I look back at my campaigns that I've run recently and say, wow, I never really did this very well, and I think it hurt the game, is like, I don't think my players ever knew what they did to level up. Right? I think I just basically said, congratulations, you're 9th level. Right? And they just leveled. They had no idea what caused that. And they didn't really care too much because nobody really complained. They got levels enough that they did it. But if I instead said, once you reach the city of Yethrin, that's worth you'll gain a level by finding the city of Yethrin. You'll gain a level by finishing the Trials of Oral. You'll gain a level by defeating the Chardalon dragon. Before they had seen that, if I wrote that down, and in Colville's point, he says, like, do it on a 3x5 card, right? Goal, kill the Chardalon dragon, reward, level up, right? That drives it. So it seems like the different games have different things that they reinforce and different kinds of rewards. And maybe it's not leveling or loot or magic items or whatever. It's something else. It's a story reward, right? There's my presumption is there's something, like almost every RPG I play has something that the characters gain when they play, right? And I think that the idea of just making it crystal clear, what it is. And Scipio here brings up that Witchlight has explicit milestones. Will I reveal them? And I'm going to bring that up when I talk about my game, because I think the answer is yes. The hard part is like, how do you reveal them if the characters don't even know the thing that they have to do?
Well, I was going to say, that's tricky because that can get spoilery if you reveal them too clearly.
That's right. But it can get spoilery, but it's also an indication that things aren't real clear if they have no idea how they should be progressing.
It also feels, does that enhance a feeling, if you get too specific like that, does that enhance a feeling of railroadiness for the players?
Well, so Colville brings that up, right? And he says that the argument is it does. He said, like, look, I only do it when they put them out there ahead of time. Like he said that in some circumstances, one of his players would say like, "Ooh, that castle over there looks really good," and he would say, "Okay, explore the castle," and then reward is, find the lost staff of Amonthier, right? And they go, "What the hell's the staff of Amonthier?" And he's like, "I don't know." And they're like, "Wow!" But he drove it from their drive.
Now,
right?
now
in his case, they brought the quest to him.
Like there's a lot there that you're talking about that I like. And Sam, what you talked about is basically what I did. So they stripped a bunch of cybernetics and wanted to get it implanted in themselves. Okay, fine. You have access to this perk when you have enough experience that you could have the cybernetics installed, which they could have had access to anyway. So pulling the cybernetics out of that creature didn't actually give them access to it. They could have just spent the experience points and gotten that thing anyway. So yeah, that's basically the same thing. Now the part of what you're saying, Mike, and what you're citing from Matt Colville, where I think there's a lot there that's right, and yet my experience says that it's not, because
where does it fall down?
I have been using milestone leveling for a very, very back into about halfway through 4th edition, right? And I've been in many cases very explicit, like, hey, when you accomplish this thing, you'll gain your level, right? You've hit this story milestone, you'll gain your level, whatever. That has not changed player behavior in terms of we're going to defeat every monster and we're going to loot every body, right? And maybe that's the nature of D&D is so combat focused. They just want to fight everything and win, because regardless of whether or not they're going to get the reward for fighting everything and winning, which they're not, there's no reward for it. They still want to fight everything and win in multiple groups.
Let me interrupt you. Let me interrupt you then and say, even if they want to fight everything, so the way around that is you have to put an objective in front of them that requires them to not kill something.
Sure.
Right? So if there's a time constraint, they can't stop at every teeny tiny combat and waste a crap ton of time fighting these inconsequential items if they have to get somewhere.
But you're talking about solving a problem. I'm not stating it as a problem. I'm just saying that I've been using this method of I'm rewarding the story, and it hasn't, and I haven't noticed a change in behavior. I don't care. Everybody's having fun.
Right.
So.
Right, but what I'm saying is because you asked about how do you respond, and I'm saying if you want to change their behavior, you have to change the way that the game responds to their activation, right, to their activity, right? It's not about. I'm not saying anything's right or wrong. Like if you're having fun, you're doing it right. Like that's not a problem. But what I'm saying is if a game was going in a way that someone in the audience didn't like, they couldn't figure out how to get their players to play the game a different way, and they wanted to see how it would work playing it a different way. That's the way to do it. You tell them you want it to work a different way, and then when they still continue to have the same behaviors, you change the way that the game world responds to the actions, right? They no longer are able to behave the way that they were because it just is not giving them the rewards they used to get.
Yeah, and Scipio in the chat is pointing out that Colville's idea that Mike was talking about was broader and largely talking about having codified rewards for player-driven goals. Is that right, Mike?
How dare Scipio to contradict me? Of course.
How dare he?
How dare he? No, but he's right. And even worse, he's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, right. Colville's idea was that there's lots of goals that can come up, and the players will bring those goals, but you can still sort of codify them. And I used to do a better job of this in 4E, and my loosey-goosey style that I run now, I kind of lose track of this sort of stuff. So
I still do. In my last campaign, I mean, obviously I was playing. There was a story arc, right? And so there were milestones that were not player driven necessarily. They were world driven, whatever. Milestone defeat Strahd, right? Although certainly by the time they did it, that was pretty player driven too. They hated that guy and they wanted to see him dead, right? but I also like I've had two of my relatively recent campaigns, one here and one in Raleigh, where I incorporated I created my own vestiges of divergence from the original Green Ronin Tal'Dorei book, and then there were more of them, I think, in the Wildmount book that came out as well. And I use that as an explicit reward for achieving player-driven goals, because that's how those items sort of level up. So, anyway, good conversation. Some other time we'll have to talk about how I don't know. I find Gloomhaven kind of meh, but
I just got the new one, the quick play Gloomhaven quick play box, the Lion
Jaws of the Lion.
Jaws of the Lion.
Yeah,
Jaws of the Lion, is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's what we've been playing.
Okay. Well, I'm sad to hear that. I mean, I've played Gloomhaven before and I like it, so right. I'm hoping it'll be the same. But yeah, my wife and I've been trying to find
I have issues with Gloomhaven. Part of it is that maybe that I'm playing with children who are very detail oriented and want to argue about everything, and that the game is built with all these algorithms about how the creatures behave and how the objectives are achieved and whatever, to the point that it feels like it was clearly supposed to be a video game, but they put a board game out instead. Because that's all a bunch of stuff that that's how video game characters move.
Yeah, there's no DM.
Right.
I mean, that AI is there because you're all
right.
You're fighting the monsters
but,
together.
But it's an AI. It's a paper and pencil AI. And,
that's correct. Yeah.
That's the part that we will sometimes bicker over and whatever. But
it's not learning. There's no stochastic element to it.
So anyway, if folks wanted to support the show and make sure that Behind the DM Screen keeps happening, so you can hear more rants from folks about Woody Allen and what he has to do with D&D, you can support us by going to patreon.com/The Tome Show and throw us a $1 a month or so and see your name in lights. I occasionally try to shout out the wonderful patrons that we have, and that's how I pay the bills as well. Because when possible, I'm trying to avoid having sponsors. I find it to be onerous. So you're all the sponsors. Thank you for doing that.
I'm with you on that idea.
Anyway, Mike.
Yo.
Tell us about your games.
Oh, sweet relief. I am done with Frost Maiden on both my campaigns. And now I am running two different campaigns. I am running a Sunday Blades in the Dark campaign, a short jaunt in using Blades in the Dark. My Sunday group and I all kind of agreed. I didn't have to push them too hard to try out some other independent RPGs. And the two that are on the list, it was Blades in the Dark was the first one because I had heard so much about it and wanted to try it.
Yeah, I've heard good things.
Yeah.
Oh.
I don't dig it as much as everybody else digs it.
Okay.
I think, for a couple of reasons. One is I found it to be very mechanically heavy. There's so many little tweaky bits here and there for how things operate. Downtime has its own set of rules and its own weird sort of styles and character creation, and it's just a lot going on. It's not Honey Heist.
A lot of mini systems.
A lot of mini systems. Yeah, and I kind of get lost. The good news is my players love it and they're totally willing, and it's so I used this metaphor before that one of the things they say in the book is that that players should play their characters like they're driving a stolen car. And what I add on to that is the DM feels like, or the GM feels like they're in the trunk of that car getting banged around while it's riding around the road. Because boy, that game just goes and you're just going with it. And it's hard for me to kind of know what I should be kind of prepping ahead of time, and they're very, very you don't prep as much as you oughta, right? You don't prep nearly as much as you think, but it's but if not, it's just going to be boring, stereotypical, cliche shit because I'm going to make it up on the spot. So why don't if I can spend a little bit of time, I'm not talking about drawing big ass maps of worlds and stuff, but having an idea about what some locations might be doesn't seem like a bad idea. So I'm figuring that out, but I've got a whole show that I do every week where I talk about
it's a fantasy sort of dark and gritty sort of thing,
it is like a Victorian era dark fantasy world, right? Again, hey, look, we went from one game with no sun to another game with no sun. And but the interesting thing is the fantasy elements are really cool, but the book tends not to exemplify those on the actual during the actual gameplay. So it's a lot of like coal factories. Like one of the areas is, and I'm like, a coal factory, like you're harvesting electroplasm from ghosts and giant demon whales. How about we put factories for that? Right. So there's kind of, it's interesting. Right. But it's fun, and we're probably going to play 4 or 5 sessions of it, and then we're going to move on to a different game. And the next one's going to be Numenera, and I'm very eager and excited to play Numenera.
Well, you've played Numenera before. I know that system.
I have played Numenera. I think it's actually my favorite mechanics. My favorite
You
RPG.
know what game I want you to play, and I want to hear your take on, is Knights Black Agents.
I have played Knights Black Agents.
Yeah.
I have not run it. I like the style a lot because it's Gumshoe, and Gumshoe is really cool. And I dig Gumshoe a lot. I think I like Gumshoe more than I like Blades, for example.
Okay.
I love the philosophy of Blades, and like as a Powered by the Apocalypse style, Fate style game, it's got all the right philosophies about like how to break our brains away from the kind of GMing that we might get used to if we played like, real, I don't know, mechanics, 3rd edition, 4th edition kind of D&D games.
So wait, I don't want us to mislead people. It's not really a Powered by the Apocalypse.
No, it is not, but it has
its own engine that's called Forged in the Dark. There's actually
Right.
several games that use that same system, but it is very similar. So I understand what you're saying, but I don't want to mislead the audience.
It's like if you read like the DM section reads like a PBTA, PBTA DM section. It's very similar. There's a lot of
same like philosophies.
The same philosophies. Yeah, the mechanics are completely different and way heavier, right? Like way heavier than a Powered by the Apocalypse game. But Numenera I've played. Numenera I think is my favorite RPG system, but I will be able to tell you for sure after I play probably a longer campaign. I'm thinking like 6 to 8 sessions of Numenera, but we'll see. My only stressor there is figuring out which one of the many adventures that I've been collecting over the years am I going to run. I think I've narrowed it down to 2, and we're going to figure that out. But the other sweet relief is I have started with my Wednesday group, Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and I totally adore it. I had my first session, my session 0 last night. The characters, my players came up with these just outstanding characters right off the bat. Like we grabbed onto the humor of it right away. Yep. And they immediately said that they're all part of a group, a support group. All the players are part of a support group called the Witchlight. I can't remember what the T stands for. The Witchlight. Damn, it's in my notes. The Witchlight T something fellowship, right? WTF.
The WTF, sure.
Yeah, and the fun bit is like in there they've had all of these meeting minutes and stuff like that, and that they've been keeping for their over the years while they've been having their support group, and they always argue about what the T stands for, right? Yeah, ticket lists, everybody, and so that's been a lot of fun. And then they all had like what they lost, and my wife said she's lost her sense of time. So she's late to stuff all the time. And even like as hard as she works to like have a clock or use sundials or come up, candles, just something always goes wrong and she's late anyway. And where this manifested worse was when she and the other members of the WTF had planned to go to the carnival 8 years ago. She got there 2 weeks late, and the carnival had already come and gone. And they're like, "Oh my God, we have to wait another 8 years." Right. So it was this wonderful, like, sort of like inter-party character thing that happened where the game hadn't even started yet. Right. And then we played in the game. And I tell you that the thing that surprised me was because of the style of the adventure, like the style and the theme changed how I'm DMing it. And it changed how the players are relating to it in a hugely fundamental way than like a traditional D&D adventure, or certainly than Rime of the Frost Maiden, right? So like the idea of like one of the players who's, he's a good friend and he's very funny, and a lot of his humor comes from cynicism, made like a role-playing cynical kind of comment, and the ticket booth guy's like, "Oh, you're going to want to leave that cynicism outside. In fact, we have a box you could go put your cynicism in right over there. Just make sure to drop all your cynicism off of the box on your way into the thing." And he's like, I go over and I put my hand in and I wave my hand in front of the box and close it again. And he's like, "Okay, good." Right. And so the characters,
he's gonna get along really well with Thaco.
I know. Right. And so it was so It was so great. And one of the things that I added to it, which I really liked, I got this from somebody on Reddit, and it worked really well. It's a problem that you get a box with all the tickets in it ready to go. But in my case, it's great because it's like, here's this old box that has the letters WTF on it. They're like, oh my God, somebody knows about our support group. And it had tickets, but then there was also a bunch of kids that didn't have any tickets. And they said, like, well, you can give your tickets to them, and instead you can do the deal with the goblin to earn your own ticket. Because there's this whole section about how you can earn a ticket by making an agreement with the goblin, and it's a goblin, and it's stuff like you have to care for this pumpkin the whole night, right? Like you have to care for it like it's a delicate egg the whole night, or you can wear this halo of flowers, but you have to water it every hour, right? And it's just. And the players were all like, yeah, those are great. And many of them took it. My wife did not. She's like, no, I'll buy a ticket. Like, I'm not dancing. It was like, you have to dance every time someone says your name. She's like, nope, not dancing. I'll buy $2 silver. I'll buy a ticket. But I think everybody else took their thing. And like, one of them was like, you have to continually talk about your love of unicorns. And my wife's like, why did I get that one? And the goblin's like, because I know how much you like unicorns. That's the challenge, right? And so it was. And the urchins were great. So like, you know, we were dancing right on the edge of our lines and veils. Cause right. I think like we said, like no violence, you're not allowed to commit violence to children as a line. And the veil was like violence towards children were veiling. Right. Mm-hmm. And then like one of the characters is a Harengon who's like a goth Harengon. And he's like hardcore. I think he's a rogue. And he's just like a hardcore Harengon. And he's like, I hate like when people treat me like I'm a bunny, right? Like I'm not a bunny. And like all these kids come up, and this one kid like with like wet eyes comes up, and he comes up to the Harengon, and the Harengon's like looking at him, and he like with a quivering hand takes out a carrot and holds it towards the and he goes, I whip out my rapier and cut that carrot in half before he can even see. And so he like slices the carrot, and the kid's like, ah, and like runs off with the carrot, right, and disappears. And he sliced it this like diagonal slice, which was important. And then later they're at the ticket booth, and they meet the kids again, and the kid's there, and he's like looking at the Harengon, and the Harengon walks over, and he's like, I'll go ahead and I'll eat your carrot if you want me to. And the kid like takes out the carrot, which had been sliced so that it's got like a sharp point. Uh-huh. And the kid like reaches towards it. He goes, I take the carrot. He goes, he pulls out every hand, stabs you in the belly, and he says, F you, rabbit. And then like, runs off. And he's like, man, that little jerk, right? And so that kid is now known as Carrot. And like one of the other characters is pretty hardcore, had a ticket. And he's like, I just go over to the other group of kids, and I'm like, only the strong can have this ticket, and like throws it. And I said, it turns into this like melee that's like out of a Peanuts cartoon with like feet and fists and a lot of dust because like we're veiling the violence, right? And then it's like, and then they come to, and here comes this girl, and she's got like red hair and pigtails like Wendy, you know, like Wendy from Wendy's, and she's got like a black eye, and she's got the ticket, and she smiles, and she's got blood on the inside of her mouth. They're like, Jesus, like what the hell did she do? And she walks by with her ticket. And then the other kid comes up, and he's holding like a big rag to his head, and it's soaked with blood. It's like, I think she got a piece of my ear, right? And so he's known as Ear. So it's just this, you know, and like they hadn't even gotten into Carnival yet, and I'm having such a great time, right? Like
I don't know if you caught my my summary of Witchlight from our review and whatever is I play tested this adventure. We played the first chapter and we played the last chapter, and that play test was probably the most fun I've ever had with this group of players in the last 2 years or whatever. And it ended in a TPK. We ended in a TPK, and everybody walked away with, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait for that to come out." I mean, we had so much fun with it. I bought the platinum box from Beetle and Grimm I'm waiting on now. Oh, nice.
So like one of the things that occurred to me, and this has a bit of recency bias to it, right? But like I think I had more fun in our session 0 than all of the sessions of Rime and the Frost Maiden. Right. Like, I think that was the most fun I had. And we only played for about an hour because we did about 2 hours of character creation. And I think I had more fun with that hour And I think it was because of the theme. I think it was like being able to describe things that are beautiful and being able to describe things that are bright, and like having the carnival come out of the hole in the sky and having Mr. Witch pop out. It was fun. It was great. So yeah, I'm adoring it. The one thing I'm adding to it, which I want to talk to you guys about and maybe get some thoughts, is and I mentioned I did an hour-long Session Zero video on the Sly Flourish YouTube channel.
But nobody watches that, so it's fine. Go ahead.
Sure, yeah. So, one of the things I wanted to say, and I brought it up with my players, and they said, yeah, that makes sense, is I'm not crazy about the idea that like combat is not exactly optional, but like you can get through the whole adventure without having a single battle, right? And in theory, and I was worried, and I've heard people talk about, well, does that mean that like when you do get into a fight, you feel like you failed? Because it's like, well, we knew there was another option for this. And I'm also like, that's also a third of the game, right? Like, the 3 pillars are there. So I said, well, is there a way that I can kind of add that in for fun? And what I realized that I wanted to do, which I'm very excited about, but I haven't yet gotten into the details, is, and this is full of spoilers, right? That what's her name? The Fey princess, the Fey lord, the Fey lady, who's Zybilna. Yeah, that Zybilna's one of the things she does when she's normally operating is she ensures that the Feywild and the domains of dread don't collide, right? She's keeping these worlds at bay. And by being captured, if you imagine spiral galaxies, one of them being Prismeer and the Feywild, and one of them being the various domains of dread, when she's captured, these two domains are crashing into one another. And as they do, what I'm referring to as dreadful incursions are occurring in both the Witchlight Carnival and Prismeer, where like a realm will open up and you will see one of the domains of dread and something might come through. And now there's these creatures that are way outside of what you would expect in Prismeer, and worlds that are way outside of Prismeer that are caused by these dreadful incursions that are like, you're sure as shit know you're going to fight those, right? Like if 12 zombies come pouring through a hole from the zombie apocalypse world, you don't have to like, we should have been able to talk our way through that. No, they're freaking zombies, right? So for me, it's like, I think it's a fun way. And the angle that's going to take place is one of the Dreadlords, one of the Dark Lords, is going to see that this is happening and realize this could be an escape from the domain of dread. This could be, whoever the Dreadlords are, or the
Dark Lords.
There's the 2 layers, right? The Dark Lords.
The Dark Lords and the Dark Powers. Those are the.
Yeah. So the Dark Power. This is a way to get out from underneath a Dark Power, right? And normally they can't, but because of this collision, they might have an opportunity. And I don't know which one of the Dark Lords it's going to be, but at some point during this campaign, I'm hoping one of the Dark Lords is going to say, holy cow, I might be able to get out of here. And now you've got this whole other perpendicular storyline smashing into the rest of it that lets me use the hell out of my Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which I want to use, and gives me an opportunity to drop a lot of fun combat in.
Well, so
whenever I feel like it's a good time.
I have 2 thoughts. One, that whole idea sounds like super wicked awesome. It reminds me a little bit of I guess this is a little spoilery for later books in the Dresden Files. When you learn more about the wind, they deal a lot with the fairy courts in the Dresden Files. And at one point later in the series, you learn that the Winter Court is not evil. They're just grizzled and more militant and whatever, because they are the bulwark between reality and what is basically their version of the Far Realm, all the aberrations from outside of reality invading and destroying everything. And so they've been fighting this constant war for millennia, and that's left them the way they are. That's why the Winter Court is cold and emotionless and whatever, right? And so there's a little bit of that that Zybilna is that in your version with the Shadowfell.
But we know who Zybilna is. And she might have responsibilities outside of her fairy
it's the exact same
right?
and that's not a completely novel concept anyway, because that's basically the story of the devils, right? The devils of hell in D&D are not all horrible because they're keeping the demons from overrunning everything, right? So that whole concept seems really kind of wicked cool to me, and I really enjoy it. On my other point, though, is playing the parts that I played, the players didn't feel like when combat broke out that it was a failure, right? They didn't.
I've had other friends of mine who have run it who said that they did.
So and maybe,
and I can see where that
and maybe it's because I didn't explicitly sell it as you can do this whole thing without combat. I just, hey, let's play this thing.
Right.
And when they wanted to fight a thing, they fought a thing. And when they wanted to find other alternatives, there were other alternatives. And it was abundantly clear that there were lots of non-combat alternatives, but that they weren't necessary. So that wasn't my experience.
Yeah, and the nice thing about the incursions is like it's another big dial I can turn. I can drop in as many or as few as I want. If they find they have lots of combat anyway and they don't really need a lot of these, they won't face a lot of them. If they if they really are like talking their way through everything, and I feel like they're itching to fight something, they can turn a corner and see an ancient dead tree, and the tree rips open, and one of those weird Chinese vampire.
I mean, honestly, the way I ran things, my players talked their way through a good chunk of Curse of Strahd. That's fine. That's a fun way to play. Honestly, I am a big fan of sessions with no combat where they role play their way through everything and whatever, because that's fun DMing for me. Like,
it is. I agree with you. There's also times where it's nice to have combat so you can take
combat
a break.
is fun, but
because it gives me an hour to think.
I'm not great at the strategizing, and honestly, combat becomes a little repetitive to me a lot of times. I would much rather role play for 6 hours than get into a big fight. But I also know that is a hallmark of D&D, so I try to have a combat in every session. And,
well, I mean that's right. I go back and forth. Yeah.
Anyway, Sam, did you?
So that's my game. I'm very excited.
Sam, did you have thoughts before I transition?
I mean, I have neither read nor played Witchlight, so I don't have a ton of thoughts. I do agree with both of you in terms of, it's nice to occasionally have a session without combat. My D&D brief game went several sessions without combat at a time, right? So I'm quite used to that sort of ebb and flow of that. But then when they had combat, it was a big deal usually when they were, when that was happening. And that's okay. I mean, games go at different paces, and some games have combat every session and some don't. Like, it's not. I don't think it's going to change, but I think the idea of the PCs in Witchlight thinking, oh no, we failed at something if they end up getting in a combat. I think the easiest way to get rid of that is just tell them out of game. No, it doesn't mean failure. It's not. It's really not that.
Except
please don't feel that way. Yeah.
They are that way, right? The reality is every encounter does have a way to be able to get around it. Some of them are pretty hard.
Some of them are pretty niche. Yeah.
Right. But it's not a failure if they actually do the combat, right? No. And that's what I'm addressing is don't feel like,
right.
The fact of the matter is the choice includes combat. Yes, you can get around it, but also you can have combat.
Honestly, I'm more worried about the idea of what if they do go through the game with almost no combat? They've spent all this time leveling up and gaining combat powers.
Yeah, right.
And doesn't that feel like a letdown that you got all these combat powers and doing nothing with it,
And so I'm just excited. But I'm also excited because it gives me a chance to explore many of the worlds in the Domain of Dread. Even if it's one encounter, if it's just a portal and they can see the Domain of Dread and they can see some craziness going on there and they can fight an interesting monster that came from that place. And then they all get a taste.
It's also interesting. I find it very interesting that Wizards is playing around with trying to come up with adventures that aren't necessarily just giant combat slogs as well. Witchlight, obviously they intended for, well, you can play this more easily with young audiences, and that's part of why it's not combat dependent and whatever. I would argue that Strixhaven is interestingly like them playing with those ideas as well. Like, there are certainly parts of Strixhaven that the expected solution is combat, right? But there's also large chunks of the story that have nothing to do with combat, and there's some parts that you could or you couldn't, So that has an interesting mix of all three.
Yeah, this is something Wizards has done really well, is over the course, I don't know how many hardcover adventures they have now, but it's like 12 or 14 or something of them, right? And with every one of them, they don't just try to stick to a formula that worked and just do that all the time. They experiment with every one of them. And I think
which is,
you know, in many ways, right? Like even in production,
right?
Even in their production plans, they experiment, and sometimes they're not great, right? And sometimes they're kind of interesting, like Dungeon of the Mad Mage is very different from every other one, right? It's like, let's do a 26 level mega dungeon, right? And so I kind of like that, and it means that if you look at the library of adventures, you can kind of see how, like, you know, look at Storm King's Thunder compared to Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Right, they're both hardcover adventures, but the scope and scale of the two of those couldn't be more far away from one another. And I kind of like,
I've,
you know, even though
I've been saying since they first started publishing books, and you could tell that they, especially when they were publishing it, and you could tell it was them sort of experimenting with things as opposed to studios that they had hired like they did at the beginning.
Right.
That they were clearly experimenting with things, and I like the fact that they're trying new things and trying to see what works and what doesn't. Sometimes I feel like they're experimenting to see what works and what doesn't, and then they abandon the experiment before they've perfected it.
And we're paying,
you know.
Well, the other one is like, we're paying $50 for their experiment.
Well, and that's fine. But that's fine. But the whole point of an experiment is you learn from it and you grow and do it better next time. And so often I see them like, oh, you're trying to do this interesting sort of sandboxy thing, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. And then the next 2 or 3 books, they've clearly like just abandoned the idea. And it's like, well, then what was the point of the experiment? You didn't learn it.
I mean, I look, because I think that Witchlight, I think I went from my least favorite to my most favorite hardcover adventure between Frostmaiden and Witchlight. I think you know, if somebody were to argue with me about Witchlight versus Curse of Strahd, I think I'd say it's your preference. But having read a good deal of Witchlight and starting to run it, and you know, I won't know until I finish it, and I might go, wow, yeah, I was wrong. It's chock full of problems.
You know,
I'm not finding problems in this one like I was finding problems in Descent into Avernus or Remnant
you
of
know what
Frostmaiden.
Witchlight has that Curse of Strahd doesn't have, in my opinion, a decently satisfying ending.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's a good question. You know, we'll see.
Curse of Strahd is a great adventure, but ultimately at the end of it, you're lucky if you're back to where you were at the beginning.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah, I guess
it's
like
kind
every
of, it's
time
kind of a
I've read
letdown.
the ending has been great.
Right?
Yeah, I don't know. And maybe it's because like I was playing I6 Ravenloft forever.
Well, right.
And I've run that story so many times.
If you're going in expecting that it's a horror movie, and at the end of a horror movie you just want to survive and get out, that's fine. But that's not really the expectation for D&D.
I usually let them see like a nice blue sky, parting of the mists.
Although
everything looks good.
I think
they like had the happiness, and then they brought joy, and then they don't realize that when they leave, it just goes right back.
I don't. I think I told you last time we chatted in December that when my campaign ended, the finale, the last scene of the campaign was, okay, you've re-trapped the dark powers into the amber sarcophagi, and the whole amber temple starts to fade away and go back to Barovia, and the last scene you see is the mist rolling in from outside, and there's Strahd reformed smiling at you, and then disappears, and you go plop into the ocean.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess
So you gave it a lame ending, is what you're saying.
Well, no, because they had this big epic, like, we've captured the dark powers and saved the world ending before that.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So it was still satisfying. But anyway, I think we are pretty close to the end of your 15 minutes. So why don't we transition?
Please.
I do want to let people know, if you want to chat with us, I am on Twitter as Squatch, SQUACH. The show is on Twitter as the Tome Show. Mike is at Sly Flourish, Sam is at DM Samuel, and you can also chat with our awesome Tome Show family little community on Discord. There is a permanent link to our Discord on the Tome Show's Twitter account, or email thetomeshow@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook, or become a patron over at Patreon and just ask, and we will happily share links with you. Mike. Not Mike.
Yo.
Sam?
I get to go again? Yes!
Sam, tell us. I have my script last month was so short that I just wrote this month's script on the bottom of it, so I keep looking at the wrong one. Sam.
Well, part part of my time might sound like Mike because I'm going to do a Rime of the Frost Maiden grievances.
Excellent.
So.
Yeah!
15 minutes on the clock. Tell us about why Frost Maiden sucks.
Well, no, that's not the position I'm coming from. But so I will tell you about
what a letdown.
I know. Sorry, I got Mike all excited.
I was so excited to hear your grievances.
Well, I'm going to tell you my grievances, but they're not the reason why Rime sucks. They're just
there's other reasons Rime sucks. Okay.
Yeah, right. My reasons are the one reasons that it sucks.
Anyway,
these are just grievances.
I'd like to reclaim my time.
No.
So I'm still also running my 5th edition Village of Hamlet game, by the way, with my teenage players, and they are now in the basement of the Moat House, and they got their butts handed to them a couple of times, and because they made a couple of I won't say wrong choices, but they made a couple of bad choices for the position they were in. They sort of overestimated their resources and ability to handle something, and they let themselves get trapped in a hallway with enemies on both ends and had no way out other than to fight. But it's been a ton of fun, and I recommend to everybody that if you ever get a chance just to play with young players who have not played before, do it. Even if you only do it once, it's really, really fun to deal with their sort of mindset and their application of their brain onto the D&D game is just fantastic. Like it's just fun. It's very different from adult players. So if you ever have a chance, just do it at least once. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about that. That's an ongoing game. We only play about once a month because when they're in school and whatnot, there's not a lot of time that overlaps that we can actually play because they do a lot of extracurricular activities and volunteering and stuff. So it's not even the case that their weekends are always free. So that game meets very rarely. So it's a pretty slow moving game. And then secondly, I want to say before I get to the Rime of the... Actually, let me do the Rime of the Frost Maiden stuff first, and then I'll get to the last thing I want to say. So this is my Sam Dillon airing grievances against Rime and the Frost Maiden. Nowhere near as bad as Mike's grievances. Just some things that Mike asked me if I would, when I'm getting close to the end, and I am close to the end. My party's in the Caves of Hunger right now. We took a hiatus for the holiday, and we're going to start back up again this Sunday. And they're in Caves of Hunger. I've probably got 4 or 5 more sessions of the game, and then I'll be done with it. Maybe, if even that. They've gotten their butts handed to them a couple of times, too, in the caves, because when they got there, they're only 7th level. So they're having some trouble. But so let me tell you, I don't have 10. There's only 7 items on my list. And these are the things that...
But you made a list.
I made a list, right? Because Mike asked me. He said
okay.
he would like it if, because I rebutted, like out of his 10 things, I rebutted all but 3 of them. I agreed with 3 of them, and I rebutted the other 7. And so I just...
No one's perfect.
Right. I know, and I know you're not perfect. And so I want, I want to give my 7, and I'm sure Mike will probably agree with all of these. And I know he's going to agree with the first one because the first one is the Frost Maiden's stats. Her stat block is. I
started the show with that, didn't I?
Yeah, it is not that well.
That might have been pre-show.
The pre-show. I started the pre-show with my.
Her stats aren't great. And the problem with it is there's not a lot of guidance on how to make her different. There's guidance that says, oh, if this part doesn't happen here, have her show up at X other location. But they don't give guidance on, well, by the time your party gets to that other location, they're going to be a vastly different level probably than they were at the first intended location. So here's how to fix this up, so to speak. And they're just not great. I think they were trying something there, and they used a sort of triple stat thing because she's got 3 forms, and they statted it to the sort of standard CRs that they set those 3 forms at, but it just doesn't work. It doesn't work well enough to make it something that I applaud.
So hopefully they learned from that experiment and they do it better later.
Right, because the thing is the three forms idea is a great idea. It's a really cool like scene that it can produce, but the stat blocks that go with it are not.
It
that
feels
great.
a little JRPG to me. It's all, it's Final Fantasy. There's always
it's interesting because they had the whole mythic idea, which they added in Mythic Odysseys of Theros, and they have in Fizzbands as well. And I wonder if they started to think through the phased boss approach.
Yeah.
I think they might have started with this one.
The problem is that it's a lot of work for the DM with not a lot of reward at the place where it is in the story and in the game, and depending on how it ends up running, not a lot of reward for the PCs either. So it's sort of misplaced, and the stats not that great. And anyway, so that's that. The second thing is the way that Velen Harpel, one of the main sort of NPCs that you deal with, and the Arcane Brotherhood, but really Velen Harpel for me, the way that she's introduced is just faulty. Because she sort of, if you do her as written, she just kind of shows up when they need her. She definitely feels like a Deus ex machina that is here to help you solve a problem that you have only right now, and it makes the PCs, if they accept her help, then they rely on her. There's a much better way to form that into the game. I actually changed her I introduced her right very early on in the first or second session, and I made her an NPC that was predominant in the area for my party, and then through different actions and favors or different behaviors that she had, they could decide whether she was a villain or not, despite her name being Velen. And that actually it felt like a more cohesive, better story. So I feel like they could have introduced her a lot better than just making her a hand of God. I'm going to rescue you by helping you out with this thing right here in the middle of the adventure.
I think I told you how lucky I was that my players actually sought somebody like that. They had a ghost that had been traveling around with them. It was a ghost of another Arcane Brotherhood member, and they said, "Go out and get help." And then he came riding back with her, and it was just perfect. Like, and I had no idea how I was going to do it. And then my wife did that. I'm like, oh, thank you. Like, you gave me a great entrance. The thing is, she had no good place after that, and they completely forgot about her once they were in the Caves of Hunger. She never came back in the adventure again.
And see, she's with my party in the Caves of Hunger, and so she's still there, and she helped them and everything. And so we're going to see what happens later on.
Yeah, I didn't want to tag along NPC, so I didn't.
So
go in.
Sonar is also with them. Sonar is the pumpkin. That's the pumpkin spice mummy that's in the Lonelywood area, and I made him an ancient Netherese wizard who had died, who they then made the guardian of that, and he has all kinds of knowledge. So when the party got back from Oral's house, I had him show up with an old Netherese skiff that was sort of skiffing along the ice and snow to get to them, to then take them to the glacier.
So I just had a thing, Mike. When you get to the end of the Witchlight Carnival, and that one character has the pumpkin that they have to treat very carefully, like a baby. When they take it from him, make sure that pumpkin then is placed into the dried husk of a mummy. That later on goes on to become the pumpkin spice mummy.
Because I've got mummies.
Because
I've got my dreadful incursions.
Right.
So,
No, that works. Yeah. See, perfect way to attach this. Perfect. So that whole thing with the mummy and the Lonelywood thing and all that, that's all great. But the thing is that the book didn't make any of those connections. I had to make those connections, right? And so the way that Velen's introduced and the way that several of the NPCs are introduced, a lot of them it's forgivable because they're just sort of in one of the towns, and so of course they're not going to be introduced earlier than when the party gets to that town. But for her, she's such an integral part of what's happening and the Yithrin ending of the thing that she needs to be introduced earlier and in a better way. So next, the other thing that annoyed me was the speed of the dogs and the speed of travel through 10 towns, completely off. I had to completely rework it before I even started the game. And so I actually posted that up on my website a long time ago because I changed how they work and how fast the dogs can go, how fast the axe beat can go, what kind of travel changes there are and stuff like that. So that it's really flawed as written. And which leads me to the next one, which is that the environment is supposed to be this harsh, horrible, -45 degree on average, blizzard all the time, always windy, really tough. But, just roll a DC 10 con check and you're fine. Like that, getting rid of that aspect of it where it's supposed to be thematic and the environment is supposed to be, part of this adventure is meant to be, man or humanoid, whatever, man versus environment, right? Like the environment is one of the sort of antagonists in this, at least in the early game, because you're low level. Once you get to higher level, I'm fine not making them deal with like a bad environment, right? Because they're higher level. But at first, second, third, even fourth level, they should be having a much harder time than rolling a DC 10 con check, con save to get rid of any effect whatsoever of the weather, right? So if it's really that bad. So that kind of irked me as a sort of old school player. That environment should really play a part in what they're doing and how they're able to accomplish things. And it just isn't, not the way it's written. For a few gold pieces, you can buy cold weather clothing and suddenly, ta-da, none of this matters. Well, then why didn't we set it on frickin' Hawaii, right? Where it's nice and sunny all the time. And you know what I'm saying? So it doesn't make a difference to any mechanical item. And it's okay to have things in an adventure that don't have a mechanical aspect. That's totally fine with me. I got it. That's totally fine with me. But the thing is that if you put a mechanical aspect onto it, don't make it so easy that it literally gets rid of that element of the game.
Yeah, why bother?
Right? Why bother? Just leave it as thematic. And
that's what I ended up doing. Right?
Yeah.
I just described it.
Right. Give the advice of make sure you're always mentioning it and you're always making it so that the PCs know that they can't see more than 20 feet because there's a blizzard, and they can't hear because the wind is howling, and do those things, but don't put a mechanical effect on it and then have it be a one roll and
one of the things they asked a lot for in the playtesting of that was playtesting the environmental, the survivability, all of that kind of stuff, and I don't think anything changed between playtesting and publication, and a lot of it's based on what's in the DMG, and so whatever.
Yeah, sure.
But I didn't find it interesting at any point in time. So
yeah, and it's not. So next grievance. The way that the Duergar and the Netherese are integrated into the whole story makes it so that. And this kind of leads into my next one, which is adding Asmodeus to the adventure, which is dumb. But putting the Duergar and the Netherese, right? They talk a big game about how the Arcane Brotherhood and Yithrin is so important, but then they don't really do anything with those at all, right? It's just sort of there, and that's fine if you want it as the backdrop. But Yithrin is the freaking ultimate end of the campaign. Those Arcane Brotherhood should be swarming this place if they really or their presence should start to be noticed, and they should start to have effects on what's happening mid game. They should do that. It shouldn't be at the end when we realize we got to find Nas Lantamir and now we're going to go open this glacier. Like that shouldn't be the first time they really hear about the Arcane Brotherhood. And this goes back to that Velen thing. It doesn't really matter that she's an Arcane Brotherhood person. It really makes no difference whatsoever, because that doesn't affect how they've introduced her at all, right? Like it has nothing to do with her, whether she helps them or not in that particular scene. So the Duergar, same with the Duergar, right? They just sort of, suddenly there's a Duergar threat and a big giant dragon. Okay, well, let's seed in. Now, to be fair, they did put a bunch of stuff in East Haven about the fairy and the Duergar there and the Chardalyn that's there and all that. And there is some stuff in one of the other towns. So if the PCs end up going to those towns and doing those tasks, those quests, then they will actually stumble across that Duergar stuff. I made sure, though, that there were hints about the Duergar everywhere that my party went after the first couple of sessions, because they needed to know that this was a much bigger threat than just, now we're suddenly fighting some Duergar in the snow like that, right? So it needs to be integrated more into the game, and they don't help with that very much. And then once the Chardalyn thing is over, and or they've gone to the stronghold and defeated Zardarok, then suddenly that threat is gone. There's nothing else about it ever again. But yet Asmodeus was supposedly the one that was behind all of that. Like that, yeah. Anyway, so which brings me to the Asmodeus and Levistus thing being in there. Suddenly there's a cult of Levistus, there's a cult of Asmodeus. Where's the cult of Oral? She's the queen of this area. Where is it? Where is it? I had to write my own product.
Well, I can tell you where, because they had cults of infernal creatures, and Oral is a goddess.
Right.
So she wouldn't have a cult, she'd have a temple, but they don't have that either. So.
Okay, but we would categorize her followers that were doing evil acts as a cult.
And Ed Greenwood
right?
would as well. That's why he has so many gods in the realms.
Right. That's right. And so my point is, they've got Asmodeus and some followers. They've got Levistus and followers. They've got Oral, no followers. Nope. Well, I mean, the Ten Towns people are sacrificing people because they're trying to appease her, but they're not actually. It doesn't talk about how there's followers of her. All the followers of her.
Sefik Kalto's a follower.
Right. No, he's chosen. He's not a follower. He's chosen. Right, and there are a couple people in there that are mentioned sort of in the Ten Towns as, oh, this person they're a follower of Oral, right? But it's not made a big deal, and those couple of NPCs don't have a big play in any part of.
And they're definitely not connected much to each other.
They're not connected to each other, not connected to anything. So that's my big thing. That's probably the worst thing, because I had to write a product for it. When I had to write a product for it, I'm asking myself Mike's question, which is, why did I pay $50?
Although it begs the question, you had to write a product for it, which, you make money on. So ultimately, that was a good choice of theirs.
Yeah, so that product happens to be an Electrum bestseller, okay? But guess what? Wizards of the Coast made as much money off of it as I have.
Oh, sure.
Right? Or, we gave part to One Bookshelf for the DTRPG service. But, I mean, yeah, I'm just saying, right? Again, I'm not usually one that says, hey, I spent $50 on this. Why am I having to do all this work? But
when you're making your own product.
Freaking product, right? Like, there's 25 pages to spare in this book. You could take some stuff out and put 25 pages of cult stuff. That could have been the supplemental, here's a new rule set for you in this book, which is available in a lot of other books, right? Of supplements, right? Ghost of Saltmarsh had the whole supplement about ships in the sea, and Asmodeus had like devilish contracts and vehicles, and they could have put something other than the couple of pages they spent on environment in Rime of the Frostmaiden, and it could have been about how to make a cult out of a place where it's a goddess, and so it's a temple, and there's a priesthood, and then there's the cultish members, right? Because that's one of the things I address in my product is there's a priesthood for sure, because that is a recognized church in the Forgotten Realms, the Church of Oral. And then there's a cult aspect where they are actually doing evil acts. Anyway, I'm going off it. The last thing, so that's six grievances. The last grievance is that the end game advice is very poor. The end game advice is very poor. I don't like the way that you get to Yithrin, and Yithrin happens, and then it's okay. So total spoilers here. So if you're playing in this, turn it off for a second. But if you get to Yithrin, you get to the end game, and your choice is you can activate this obelisk and go back 2,000 years or not. Give me some advice.
Yeah, no, the
about, right? Like, tell me about what that means. To be fair, they give a one-page thing, and it talks about what was going on in the world at that time and what you could do if they end up choosing to activate it and end up in Yithrin 2,000 years ago. Like, it's fine, but it's
honestly,
not
if this adventure doesn't end, if the climactic conclusion of the adventure isn't the ultimate defeat of Oral, then the whole adventure was dumb to begin with, because that's been the whole point from page one. And then in theory you get to the end and it's like, oh, and then you just fight this demi-lich that had nothing to do with any of that, and that's sort of the big climactic conclusion.
Yeah, I don't think the intent was that. Like, I think that Sam often talks about how Frost Maiden is really sort of almost a West Marches style. Players can go wherever they want and choose whatever path that they want. I think Oral is a secondary issue. I don't think that's the driver.
Well, but
right?
the driver is
I don't
definitely
think-
not this Demi-Lich in the Obelisk.
No, but like the driver is also not the
But see,
Duergar. The
but-
driver is also not,
Sure.
Right,
the
but-
Knoll,
but-
the Knolls and the
Right.
Kraken Chasm. There's lots of stuff that's
You're
not
right.
the
I
driver.
agree.
Right,
That's
but
why I haven't
It's
run
just
it.
another. It's just another.
That's
play.
why I haven't used
Wait,
it.
but Jeff, that's why I say like the thing they didn't do was bring the Netherese
Right.
into the story and make it integrated. It's a side quest.
Yeah, Yithrin.
right?
Yithrin
It's
is a
like a side
Yithrin is a great location, and I really loved using it in my campaign for a completely non-Rime Frostmaiden story. Like it worked really well for me. But that's because I wasn't trying to tell their story.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing, though. But because I read the whole thing before I started running it, I knew I had to make these changes. So I made it so that, my players, in part of one of their backstories, one of them has a backstory that deals with a premonition and a guardian, because she's a celestial Asimar. Her guardian said something about, something dangerous occurring, and the prophecy was such that when they get up there, she might assume it's Oral that's the problem, but then she gets more information, realizes, oh no, that's not what this guardian was talking about. The guardian was actually talking about Yithrin as the danger, and so that I could sort of weave that into the entire game, right? But only because I read the whole thing and I could figure out, okay, how am I going to attach these things together? But the book didn't do that for me at all.
Yep,
the book didn't do it for me
I
at
agree.
all. So, which, and again, this is where I'm kind of calling these grievances, because I'm kind of making fun of Mike because he had his big list of grievances. The thing is, I still really like this adventure, and the type of prep I did for this isn't any different from the type of prep I do for anything. So for me, it was just, it's a different thing. There are some of these things irk me more than others. Obviously, the no cult of Oral thing irked me so much that I sat and wrote a product. But the environment thing, that irks the hell out of me. That bugs me. And I've not heard really anybody mention that part of it. And that's maybe my biggest bitch about this thing.
You forgot to mention the trials.
Oh yeah, because I've wiped those from my mind because they're so stupid.
They're so bad, they're not even on the list.
Yeah, they're one of the things that I agreed with you about. They're just so horrible that I just didn't even, And the thing is that that's an opportunity to work that into what you're doing. Like what I did with my party was directly connected to their backgrounds, what they saw when they went into the 4 rooms where they would have had the trials instead. I got rid of those trials and I did other things, and it worked really well for my group because I tailored it to the PCs. But the thing is, and here's what I always say about all these big old 300-page hardback adventures, what they really need to do is put some advice about how to make this your own and how to make this so that it matches the choices that your PCs made in character generation. They still don't do that. They're not giving any advice on how to make this thing really work for you. They're just saying, here it is, here's our product, and ta-da! And now we're moving on to the next one that we're doing, and now we're going to start marketing the next one. And there's really they really are relying on, and I don't know if this is actually their intention or not, but they're really relying on, the DM's Guild to sort of fill in any gaps that people complain about, right? Because they're not really addressing any complaints that anyone makes, whether they're valid or not, right? Like I've heard some very valid complaints about just about every adventure, and they never, ever address those. Even if some of those were sort of the experimental parts of those adventures, they never address those. Like Jeff said, what was the point of the experiment if you're never actually going to address it and learn from it? And they're just counting on people like adding stuff from the DM's Guild, which is fine, I guess. I mean, it's just what it is, but I don't know. So my last thing I want to say is not about Rime of the Frost. Oh, I do. There's 2 more things. One of them is about Rime of the Frostmaiden, because the vampire Knoll is badass.
Oh,
okay.
No, he's not. He's not even legendary.
No.
You can be taken out with 1 spell.
No. Not if your party's 7th level and are scared to death of him. Because what I did was one of my PCs has the runaway author background, and just recently, right, a couple of sessions before they went into the Caves of Hunger, one of the people in Tin Towns told him, the PC, look, you're gonna there are some assassins that are looking for you. The Castellanters sent because the PC wrote bad things about the Castellanters. Okay, the Castellanters have dispatched assassins to come and get you, so you need to be watching your back. That's what one of the PC's confidants told him. And so now they're all freaked out. Oh no, there's assassins. But they're like, oh, but we're going to this glacier, no problem. There's not going to be an assassin in there. And then. And yeah, I know, Mike, I know, but I'm much harder on my PCs. So they weren't 8th level when they got there, okay? They weren't 8th level.
And now Sam is responding to things that Mike is putting in the chat.
So technically speaking, the way the adventure is written, it says you should be 8th level before you go into the Caves of Hunger. But I'm a bastard DM. They hadn't hit 8th level yet. I'm sorry. They went in anyway. I'm sorry. That's just how it is.
Yeah, he's badass if you don't play the adventure the way the adventure is intended to be played.
Well, so they met him, but they didn't really fight him, and now they're 8th level, and they're going to meet him again. So here's the thing, right? So because I foreshadowed that, and then they get there, and I played him as an intelligent hunter. So he was tracking them, and then when he shows up in his humanoid form, and he has an English accent. He speaks very proper, and he basically just kind of they noticed there's some weird movement, and because he was misted and invisible, and then he sort of coalesced, and then he basically was like, oh, so which one of you is the author? Mm-hmm. And they all went, holy crap, we know this must be the assassin, right? And so it was a cool scene, and then they kind of beat on him a couple of times, and then yeah, I know, but he doesn't have a charisma of 9 in my game. And then,
I mean,
and then he beat on them. He did a bunch of damage, and then he missed it out, right? And so, like, that's the sort of thing, though, that I've had to do to make this adventure make sense and be fun, right? Like that. But that's not really an indictment of the adventure, because that's what I do with every adventure. Okay.
Yeah, and in fairness, the idea of Tech Lely is awesome, and when I ran him for both my groups, he was badass, but I used the vampire stat block.
Yeah.
So that he was actually badass.
Yeah. No, I pumped up his stats and whatnot because I wanted him to be an intelligent assassin with a good charisma and be able to he doesn't have any charisma based powers, but I wanted him to be able to, speak well and sort of freak them out because he's like the gentleman assassin. You're not going to know he's there until he's right there in your face.
Yeah. He was really fun, and I had foreshadowed him very early. So for months they had been hearing about Tech Lely. He had a caller. Mm-hmm. Who was really great. This pain in the ass kobold vampire named not Renfield, because that's the actual one. Rendhollow. And Rendhollow was like, he was great.
Yeah, that's a great part of the adventure. This adventure has so many little things in it that are really, really great if you integrate them in and you make them part of the PC's backstory and you make them important to what's going on. It can be really, really, really fun. But I can totally understand why somebody like Mike would not dig this adventure. It's not a good thematic match for him, and it's not put together well enough to make it work for him, and it has problems with some of the stats. and
I'm gonna cut off your sentence at it's not built well.
It's not built well. I agree with that. The thing that's not on my list is the other thing I've been bitching about since the beginning, and that is the flowchart. Right?
The one that's one-dimensional and doesn't work anyway.
Yeah, the reason why that's not a good flowchart is because it doesn't really give you any kind of depiction of how you could possibly run this adventure. It just says, do chapter 1, then do chapter 2, then do chapter 3, then do chapter 4 or 5.
And then it turns out you don't do them that way.
Right.
Yeah, and you don't do them that way. And so
they haven't had a good flowchart since Storm King's Thunder, and it made sense. It made sense there. And they're like, and they got all this praise for it, and so they keep doing it. But like a straight line is not a flowchart. Stop it.
Right. Well, it's a flowchart. It's just, it's not one with any interest. It's not one you need because it's just a straight line, right? So and the thing is that they could have done much better. They could have done a relationship map. They could have they could have taken the great page that they have with the list of NPCs where they give pronunciations and that flowchart page. Those 2 pages could have been much better used if they gave the NPC information and then gave what the relationships are. Who do they know? What town are they in? How do you pronounce their name? And which part of the story are they important to? Are they important to 10 towns? Are they important to the Duergar? Are they important to the Levista stuff? Or are they important to Oral or to Yithrin? Like, those are the 5 sort of disparate things going on in 10 towns, and they don't connect those very well. So if they spent those 2 pages doing that, it would look much better built, right? It would look much better built. The last thing I want to say has nothing to do with Rime of the Frost Maiden. It's that I decided that my big campaign this year is going to be a Traveler campaign, because it's been a while since I've played Traveler, and so I'm going to run this long campaign called Deep Night Revelation, which is basically this sort of spacefaring. You go out and you're really, it's almost Star Trek-like in that you are examining this part of the universe that has not been charted yet. So you're sort of going on this 10-year long mission to chart uncharted things and find out some information about what's going on. So I'm looking forward to that. And so that's what I'll be reporting on next time.
And I look forward to hearing about that, because I picked up the Expanse RPG on the Humble Bundle with all of the modern age stuff, because I like the age system and it was cheap to get all of that at once. And one of my players is a big Expanse fan. So anyway, I look forward to hearing about that, and I might steal some ideas from you. But what I was going to say is, somehow we have managed to put together an episode that is over an hour and 15 minutes long. And I will point out, I stuck to my time, so that means the 2 of you each spoke for half an hour. So I think
I disagree that you kept.
Well, I went a little bit over, but not much. Not much. I only.
Not to mention getting involved in
I only played 1 session, so I didn't have much to talk about. So that means next time, after I've played a few sessions, I get extra time, and you all have to listen to me talk. Sure. Exactly. That's pretty much the organization for the show, right? Yeah, whatever. Yep. We'll see what happens. So anyway, unless anybody's really desperate to say something else at an hour and 18 minutes in, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the episode. Okay.
We're good.
So we're going to call that the end of this episode of Behind the DM Screen. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Mike and Sam, for hanging out with me tonight. So say goodbye. Say goodbye, guys.
It's a pleasure. Goodbye, guys.
Bye.
And that's where I'll stop it eventually when I find the window I'm looking for. There. So, nice. And we should say goodbye to the stream.
Yeah. Bye, stream.
Bye, stream. It's lovely
Thanks
to have you here.
Thanks for hanging out with us.